Some meetings feel ordinary, until you look back and realize they were divine interruptions. Julian wasn't looking for love, he was searching for freedom. Nina wasn't waiting for a hero, she was building walls to survive. But when destiny weaves two wounded hearts together, every secret becomes dangerous, every choice becomes costly, and every whisper feels like heaven pointing the way. This is a story of courage, betrayal, and a love strong enough to fight back. This is the story of Julian and Nina. Julian Cross hated wasting time. The low hum of the private elevator sliced through the silence of the Crosstech Tower's top floor. The moment the polished steel doors parted, Julian stepped out, his shoes echoing sharply on the marble floors. The floor was pristine, modern, and clinically quiet, just how he liked it. Order. Focus. Control. He checked his watch. Another assistant, gone. Another failed attempt at finding someone who could tolerate him, or whom he could tolerate. Either way, HR had promised a new one today. He sighed, barely looking up as he approached his corner office, walls made entirely of glass overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He didn't care about the view. He cared about precision. And productivity. And not having to explain himself twice. Julian's phone buzzed. "She's here," his interim assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Send her in." A moment later, the door opened. And she walked in. Nina Rivera was composed. No overdone makeup. No desperate-to-please smile. Just a fitted black blazer, confident posture, and a calmness that didn't match his expectations. She met his gaze squarely, her hazel eyes steady. He arched an eyebrow. "Ms. Rivera." "Mr. Cross," she replied smoothly, taking the seat opposite his desk without waiting to be offered. "Bolt." He liked Bolt. He skimmed her file with one hand, the other adjusting the cuff of his white dress shirt. "Your resume is solid. Why leave your last job?" "They asked too many questions about my personal life," she said evenly. That caught his attention. "Do I need to?" he asked. "Only if it affects how I do this one." "It won't." She didn't flinch. He stared at her a beat longer than necessary, then finally nodded. "You start now." "I already have," she said, placing a printed summary of his next 5 meetings on his desk. Julian blinked. "Okay then." Across the city that night, under the pulsing blue lights of an exclusive midtown lounge, Luna took the stage. She was electric, graceful, unreachable. A masked dancer wrapped in silk and light, she moved like liquid gold, commanding, mysterious, and untouchable. Her costume shimmered with every turn. Her mask glittered just enough to catch the light, never enough to reveal the woman beneath. The music swelled. The room held its breath. Strangers in tailored suits leaned forward. Crystal glasses of whiskey froze midway to lips. Eyes widened, riveted. Because Luna wasn't just a dancer. She was a presence. A storm bottled into silk and fire. But when the song ended and she disappeared behind velvet curtains, not one of them could claim to know who she really was. Friday night. Julian Blake didn't usually take advice from anyone, especially not his best friend, Roman. But tonight, after too many 12-hour days and too many silence-filled dinners, he finally gave in. One night out. One drink. No business talk. That was the deal. The black town car pulled up in front of a velvet-curtained entrance. No sign. No branding. Just a line of men in tailored jackets and whispers of exclusivity. Julian hesitated. Roman grinned. "You've been running from life, Jules. Time to let it catch up." Inside the velvet room, the atmosphere was heavy and indulgent. Dim lights. Jazz mingling with synth. The scent of perfume and amber whiskey. Julian adjusted his cufflinks, his walls still firmly up. He wasn't here to enjoy anything. He was here to forget everything. Then the lights dimmed further. The music shifted. The announcer's voice cut through the air. "Gentlemen, tonight, Luna returns." Julian leaned back in his seat, uninterested, until she walked onto the stage. Red satin. Silver heels. Masked eyes. She didn't move like the others. She commanded. Every movement was deliberate. Controlled. Magnetic. Julian blinked. Something about her made the noise in his head stop. Who is she? He didn't recognize her face, the mask made sure of that. But her presence was familiar. Roman nudged him. "You're actually watching someone. That's new." Julian didn't respond. He couldn't look away. Luna moved like she was dancing with a secret. One the audience didn't deserve to know. And Julian, a man used to owning everything in the room, suddenly wanted nothing more than to understand what that secret was. The music slowed. The lights dimmed further. She ended with a final pose. Still defiant. Then vanished behind the curtain. Applause erupted, but Julian didn't clap. He was too busy staring at the empty space she'd left behind. His voice was low, almost to himself. "Who is she?" Roman raised a brow. "She's elusive. Never gives interviews. No private shows. No real name. Just shows up, burns the stage down, then disappears." Julian finished his drink in a single swallow. He just watched. He didn't think of his new executive assistant at the office. The one who'd started just 2 weeks ago. The one who kept her head down, wore muted colors, and said exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more. His mind didn't go there. Not yet. He tossed a few $100 bills onto the table, nodded politely at the bartender, and left before the performance ended. He didn't usually come back. But this time, maybe he would. The dressing room wasn't as glamorous as the stage. Faded wallpaper peeled at the corners. A flickering vanity light buzzed above cracked mirrors. Glitter clung to every surface like it was part of the air. But to Nina, it was familiar. She sat in front of the mirror, slowly peeling off the mask. Her real name was Nina Rivera. 27. Smart. Educated. MBA with honors. And no one in her family knew she danced on weekends. No one at her day job, least of all the CEO of CrossTech, knew that the quiet, capable assistant who brought him black coffee with a dash of almond milk on Monday morning had spent Saturday night on a pole under a different name. But secrets were the currency of survival. And Nina had learned long ago how to keep hers locked behind a perfect smile and a neutral wardrobe. Tonight had been close though. She'd felt him. The man in the corner booth. The one with eyes like slate and a suit tailored like sin. He hadn't gawked. He hadn't smirked. He just watched intently, like he was trying to see through her mask. Julian Cross. She knew it was him the second he walked in, not because of the money or the way people moved when he passed, but because she worked 12 feet from his office every day. He hadn't recognized her. Not in the dark. Not in this light. Not in that dress. But it had rattled her. A dancer named Sasha stepped in, chewing gum and fixing a strap on her top. "He was into you," she said casually, jerking her chin toward the curtain. "You gonna play that angle?" Nina shook her head. "He's nobody." Sasha smirked. "Girl, they're all nobody until they start tipping like gods." Nina forced a chuckle. "I'm just here to pay rent." She wiped off the last of her lipstick, pulled her curls into a tight bun, and changed into jeans and an oversized hoodie. The transformation was swift, from fantasy to invisible in under 3 minutes. That was the secret. Be unforgettable when it counts. Then vanish. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been for April. She pulled the hood over her head and caught the subway at 2:17 a.m., standing between a sleeping drunk and a teen scrolling TikTok with cracked earbuds. She had a presentation to prep for Julian in 6 hours. Her lives never touched. Until now. And as she closed her eyes against the sway of the train, she knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. They would. Sooner than she was ready for. Morning came with the thrum of city traffic and the soft click of designer shoes on polished marble. The CrossTech Tower's headquarters towered over Midtown, all glass and ambition. The kind of place where people traded time for power and loyalty for paychecks. Inside the 39th floor, the marketing team was already buzzing, deadlines loomed, campaigns waited, and the espresso machine hissed like a breathing dragon. Nina sat at her desk by 8:05 a.m., crisp white blouse, navy slacks, hair pinned into a neat coil. Her makeup was minimal, her heels conservative. Not a hint of glitter. Not a trace of sequins. She was Nina here. And she was excellent at it. Her inbox overflowed with meeting invites and last-minute revisions. A new client pitch was on the schedule, and Julian's calendar was booked to the minute. She knew because she managed it. As the elevator dinged open at 8:17 a.m., he stepped out. Julian Cross. Black suit. Sharp tie. Caffeinated gaze. The world seemed to pause around him. Even when he was silent, he commanded motion. Heads turned. People stood straighter. Morning, Nina greeted, handing him his usual. Almond milk, no sugar. He glanced at her, nodded, took the cup. But his fingers paused ever so slightly around the lid. A flicker. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, heart rate steady. Maybe. He kept walking. No recognition. Not really. But something about the dancer last night tugged at his mind like a loose thread on a finely tailored suit. Not enough to unravel. Just enough to notice. He entered his office and shut the door. Nina exhaled. The quiet kind. No one knew. Across the morning, they passed each other in meetings, exchanged notes, discussed strategy like professionals. At 11:32 a.m., he called her in. She stood at the edge of his desk, laptop in hand. Monday's pitch, you moved it up? Yes, the client requested Friday instead. I shifted the briefs to accommodate. Creative should have drafts by tomorrow. He nodded, eyes scanning the schedule. Then looked up. You get any sleep? She blinked. A little. His expression didn't change. I've noticed you're always early. Even when no one else is. Nina smiled, professional and polite. Habit. I like quiet mornings. He studied her a bit longer than necessary. But, keep it that way? Dismissed. She turned, walked out, closed the door gently. Behind it, Julian frowned slightly at his untouched coffee. There was something. A whisper of recognition. But the day pressed on, demanding his attention elsewhere. Monday came with sharp sunlight and a whisper of change. The office was quieter than usual. The weekend mixer had left behind remnants of small talk and second glances. Especially between two people. Julian Cross had barely looked up from his tablet since 7 a.m., reviewing project notes and preparing for the week ahead. Focused. Measured. Controlled. Until his chief strategy officer, Dana, stepped into his office, grinning like she knew something the rest of the world didn't. We have a situation, she said, dropping a slim portfolio onto his desk. Isn't that why I pay you? He muttered without looking up. You'll want to handle this one personally. That got his attention. He flipped open the folder, campaign briefs, client notes, a sharp deadline in red ink. Valor Tech? He asked. Didn't think we'd landed that yet. We did. Friday night. So's a friend of mine. Wants our top mind on the brand refresh. He frowned. That's you. Dana smirked. Flattered, but no. They asked for someone else. Said one of your junior creatives caught their eye last quarter. He blinked. Who? Dana turned, already heading for the door. Nina Rivera. She's all yours for the next 6 weeks. Julian sat back. Nina? He hadn't known much about her until last week, and now, she was suddenly everywhere. She entered his office 30 minutes later, not quite meeting his eyes, clutching a notepad too tightly. You asked for me? He nodded. Valor Tech wants a rebrand. You're leading the creative with me. She stared. Me? With the problem? No. Just surprised. You've got good instincts, he said. And they noticed. She blinked. The compliment landed heavier than she expected. He stood, gesturing toward the whiteboard. Walk me through what you do differently. They spent the next 2 hours sketching, revising, challenging each other's thinking. And somewhere between slide mock-ups and logo redesigns, it happened. That thing. The shift. Their rhythm was easy. Too easy. He noticed the way she bit her lip when she was thinking. She noticed how he leaned closer when he got excited. They traded barbs and ideas. Laughed without meaning to. At one point, he reached around her to grab a marker. His hand grazed her arm. She didn't move. Neither did he. Their eyes met. Something caught. Too close. Too soon. He stepped back first. Let's break for now. She nodded, voice tight. Good idea. As she left his office, Nina's heart was pounding harder than it had in weeks. And not because of deadlines. Because of Julian Cross. The man who wasn't supposed to notice her. The man who absolutely could never know everything. Because the deeper this project pulled them together, the more likely it was that her secret life might explode in his very polished, very powerful hands. The office at night was a different world. Empty corridors. The soft hum of machines in sleep mode. City lights flickering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across sleek floors and glass walls. Julian was still in his office. He hadn't meant to stay late. But every time he tried to close his laptop, something in the presentation called him back. And if he was honest, so did someone else. At exactly 8:42 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Nina stood there with a thermos and 2 paper cups. You looked like someone who needed coffee more than pride. Julian raised an eyebrow. You assume I have pride left at this hour? She shrugged, stepping inside. We're both still here. That says everything. She poured the coffee and slid one across his desk without asking. Comfortable. Unceremonious. And kind of warm. They worked side by side, laptops open, bouncing ideas and edits in silence broken only by typing and the occasional wait. What if we flip slide 6? Or, that tagline's not landing yet. The hours ticked by. Midnight came. Then 1. Eventually, Julian leaned back, sighing. We're dangerously close to brilliance, or madness. Nina laughed softly, leaning back too. Her shoes were off, tucked beside her chair. Her hair was looser than usual, a few strands falling near her cheek. She didn't bother brushing them away. He noticed. Of course he did. She looked at him then. Really looked. You always work this hard? Julian tilted his head. It's not about working hard. It's about doing it right. You ever just let go? He was quiet, thoughtful. I used to. But letting go comes with risks. She nodded slowly. Yeah. It does. He met her eyes. And in the hush of that office, between coffee cups and project deadlines, something stretched and tightened between them. The sharp tension from their first meeting, this was softer. Hungrier. Human. He reached for the pen she had been using, fingers brushing hers. She didn't move. Neither did he. Seconds ticked by like heartbeats. Then she stood up too fast. I should go. He rose as well. Nina. I'm fine, she said, grabbing her bag. Really? We're good. The deck looks good. He watched her go, a strange hollowness forming in his chest. The glass doors closed behind her. Julian stood in the silence, his heart loud in his ears. They were getting too close. And he didn't even know just how complicated she really was. Julian never planned to return to Velvet 9. But there he was, 3 nights later, leaning against the high-gloss bar, fingers wrapped around a glass of bourbon he didn't really want. A client dinner had ended early. His apartment felt too quiet. And something, or maybe someone, had tugged at his thoughts since the last time he was here. The music pulsed like a heartbeat. Velvet red lights moved across the room like breath. Tables were full, conversations loud, but his eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on the stage. And then she appeared. Not right away. The first dancers faded through routines with impressive, mechanical grace. But she was different. Subtle. Controlled. Every movement of hers suggested she didn't need the stage to own the room. She already had. Julian's grip tightened on his glass. He couldn't name the emotion exactly. Fascination? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it rooted him in place. She was wearing a simple, dark mask. Not elaborate like the others. Her outfit minimal. Tasteful. Powerful. Her body moved like she was telling a story no one else could hear. And Julian leaned forward slightly, not realizing he'd stopped breathing. She didn't look at him. Not once. And yet, something in her stillness, in her quiet command of the room, pulled him closer than any look would have. He didn't realize how long he watched until the routine ended and applause scattered through the air. She disappeared behind the curtain. Gone. And just like that, the air seemed thinner. He set his drink down and asked the bartender, casually, "What's her name?" The man smirked but didn't answer. She doesn't talk much. Doesn't stick around after sets. Kind of a mystery. Julian nodded slowly, lips pressed into a thoughtful line. He didn't recognize her. Not really. But there was something. Something familiar. He didn't know her voice. Not yet. Didn't recognize the curve of her walk when she wore flats and blazers and carried a laptop. Not yet. But the seed had been planted. And Nina? Behind the curtain, breathless, pressed to the dressing room door, she had seen him. And she had panicked. Monday morning came too fast. Nina stood in front of the mirror, hands pressed to the edge of the bathroom sink, eyes searching her own reflection. "Get it together," she whispered. She had almost called in sick. Twice. But that would have raised suspicion, and if Julian had recognized her at the club, the worst thing she could do was disappear. So she pulled her curls into a neat bun, slipped on a navy blouse and wide leg slacks, applied minimal makeup, and forced her pulse into something that resembled calm. The building's elevator felt smaller than usual. The 26th floor felt colder. She stepped into the open office space, greeted a few early arrivals, and moved quickly to her desk near the far window. Julian's office door was closed. Relief. For now. But then came the email. Subject: Morning Briefing. From Julian Cross. To Nina Rivera. Conference room. 9 o'clock, just you and me. She swallowed hard. When 9 o'clock hit, she walked in with her notepad clutched tighter than necessary. Julian was already seated, sleeves rolled, jacket off, coffee in hand. The CEO look, but a little more undone than usual. "Nina," he said casually, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Thanks for coming." She nodded, sat. For a moment, he said nothing. Just studied her, like a man staring at a complex painting, something he couldn't quite decode but couldn't stop looking at either. She held his gaze, chin high. "You okay?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she said, a little too quickly. "Why? You seemed distant this morning." She forced a smile. "Late night. Nothing dramatic." That sound again. The one he made when something didn't add up. But he didn't press. He moved on to campaign timelines, new client profiles, market research. She answered precisely. Professional. But she could feel his eyes on her, even when he looked at his laptop. Studying her too hard. Like he was trying to place her. And then, "Nina." "Yes. Do I know you from somewhere else?" Her breath stopped. Seconds passed like hours. "I mean, outside the office," Julian added. There was danger. She smiled politely, tilting her head. "You mean besides the 4 presentations I've boiled and 12 meetings I've attended since I got here?" He chuckled. "Fair enough." He dropped it. But her hands were sweating under the table. After the meeting, she walked straight to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and sat down on the closed lid. He was close. He had seen her. Maybe not enough to be sure, but enough to wonder. She closed her eyes. One more night at that club, and it might all fall apart. Julian didn't plan to go back. He told himself he needed to blow off steam, that the board meeting had drained him, that he just wanted a drink and something loud enough to drown his thoughts. But if that were true, why this club again? The lights pulsed red and gold as he entered. The music thumped beneath his feet like a heartbeat. The hostess greeted him with a smile too polished to be real. "Back again so soon?" she purred. He just nodded. This time, he chose a booth farther from the stage. He didn't want to be obvious, wasn't even sure what he was looking for. But he knew what had stuck with him. That girl. The one with eyes like secrets and a stage presence that hit like poetry. She danced like the world was on fire behind her, and she was the only one who knew how to walk through it. She looked familiar. Not the way women at clubs usually looked familiar. This was something else. The way she moved. The curve of her jaw. Even the tilt of her head when she glanced at the crowd. He'd spent the whole weekend asking himself, "Do I know her?" The announcer's voice cut through the air. And now, returning by popular demand. The music started. Slow. Haunting. And then, she stepped onto the stage. Tonight she wore deep crimson. No mask. Hair down. His breath caught in his throat. It was her. He wasn't 100% sure, not yet, but something inside him knew. And this time, he watched differently. Not like a man hypnotized by seduction, but like someone solving a riddle with each movement. She was electric, controlled, powerful. But then, for a flicker of a moment, she turned toward the crowd. Her eyes passed over him. Widened. Only just. She looked away too quickly. Kept dancing. Kept control. But it was there. Recognition. Julian sat back, heart hammering. It's her. Not just a fantasy. Not just a resemblance. Nina Rivera. His assistant. The woman who'd handed him coffee this morning and built last week's client pitch. Dancing like a storm made flesh. His mouth went dry. Everything suddenly felt louder. Too loud. He left before the set ended. Stepped into the night air. Stood under the awning with the realization settling over him like falling ash. Now what? Nina had danced for strangers 100 times. Men with wandering eyes and shallow attention spans. Women with secrets etched into their stares. Music, lights, smoke, all blending into one long blur of detachment. But last night felt different. His eyes had been different. Julian. She hadn't meant to glance that way. Hadn't meant to even notice. She never looked at faces if she could help it. But her body had known before her brain caught up. A jolt of recognition. The kind of tension you don't fake. And when she caught his eyes, dark, unreadable, locked onto her like a question he was almost ready to ask, her entire soul clenched. Now, sitting at her desk the next morning, Nina couldn't breathe right. Julian was late. He was never late. She kept her hands busy, typing, reviewing documents she couldn't concentrate on. Every sound from the hallway made her flinch. Every second without him felt like a countdown. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya, her best friend. You okay? You seemed off last night. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Because she wasn't okay. And she wasn't just off, she was teetering. When Julian finally walked in, her pulse spiked. He looked normal. Neutral. Except he wasn't. His good morning was softer than usual. He didn't look at her too long, but when he did, it was intentional. She tried to focus. Tried to act normal. But when he handed her a file, their fingers brushed, and it felt like fire. She pulled away too fast. He said nothing. The silence was a scream. She couldn't take it. In the elevator, alone, she stared at her reflection. Her eyes looked haunted. Her lipstick, perfect. Her life, about to explode. She thought back to that moment on stage. The second their eyes met. She hadn't imagined it. He knows. Or at least he suspects. Back at her desk, she opened her calendar. There was her last paycheck. A blinking reminder that this job, this mask, was all she had holding her world together. If Julian knew, if he really knew, it could all come crashing down. And yet, some stubborn part of her, the part that didn't scare easily, whispered something wild. Maybe he didn't leave because he was disgusted. Maybe he left because he couldn't handle how he felt. She shut the thought down. Hope was dangerous. Especially when your secret wore 6-inch heels and a spotlight. Julian had always been a man of precision. Every word in a pitch, every decimal in a budget, intentional, controlled. That control was what made Carrington and Brand untouchable. But Nina? She was the one equation he hadn't solved. All week, their interactions had been not cold, not awkward, just tight, like a taut string stretched too far. She wore professionalism like armor, the blouses, the tidy bun, the pleasant smile. But behind her eyes, something danced. Awareness. Fear. Maybe even defiance. And Julian? He had stopped sleeping. Not because he was angry. Not really. He was fascinated. So he kept watching. Little things. She never made it to Friday happy hour anymore, not in the last 2 weeks. She never walked out of the building before 9 p.m. And she suddenly had cash, crisp bills folded neatly in a book in her tote. He noticed. Of course he did. On Wednesday, he casually dropped by her cubicle with 2 cappuccinos. You look tired, he said, setting one down for her. Late night. She glanced up, blinking. Thanks. Just couldn't sleep. You were working late? I stayed to finish the Baxter edits. He leaned against her desk, arms crossed. Strange. I left at 7. I didn't see you. She paused for half a second. Then, I stepped out to grab soup. Came back. He nodded. I'm sure it was a productive night. He turned and walked away, noticing the barely touched soup containers still in her trash. That Friday, Julian stepped into the staff lounge at noon and saw Nina talking to Clara from admin. Had to do the costume fitting tonight, Nina was saying. Clara smiled. That sounds fun. What for? Nina froze. Julian opened the fridge behind them, pretending not to listen. That's my niece. She has a school play. I'm helping out with the outfits. Sweet. Clara beamed. Julian shut the fridge softly. Didn't say a word. Just nodded politely and walked out. That night, Julian stood across the street from Velvet 9 again. He told himself he wasn't going in. He lied. Inside, the air shimmered with bass and temptation. He found a corner. Quiet. Hidden. Watching. And when the velvet curtain lifted for the midnight set, there she was. Nina. But not quite Nina. Tonight she wore silver. Sequins and silk, her eyes lined in charcoal and shimmer. Hair down. Movement like poetry. Confidence like lightning. She owned the stage. The crowd cheered. Julian stood perfectly still, his hand around a sweating glass of scotch. And then, her eyes swept the room. For a second, they landed on him. And even under layers of light and sound and pretense. She knew. He knew. They both knew. Backstage, after the set, Nina's hands shook as she wiped glitter from her chest. She couldn't breathe. He'd seen her. Really seen her. And he hadn't left. He hadn't yelled. Or scoffed. Or disappeared. He just watched. And for some reason, that scared her more. Julian hadn't slept. He sat in the dark of his penthouse study, the city lights stretching far beneath him, but offering no clarity. His scotch sat untouched. His thoughts didn't. He kept seeing her. Not Nina from the 9th floor. Not his assistant. The woman on stage. The one with fire in her eyes and something wild in her veins. And the worst part? He wasn't disgusted. He was intrigued. Compelled. That was the part that unsettled him most. The morning hit too soon. Julian arrived at the office like always, sharp, controlled, unreadable, but something in his energy was different. Less composed. Less distant. Her desk was empty. At 8:17 a.m., she walked in. Plain blouse. Dark slacks. No makeup. Sunglasses on despite the gray morning light. She hesitated when she saw him already there. Nina, he said, voice low. My office. Please. She followed him without a word. He didn't sit. Neither did she. He closed the door quietly, then turned to face her, hands in his pockets. You know why you're here? Yes, she said calmly, though her fingers clenched slightly. He studied her. I saw you. Last night. Her jaw tensed, but she said nothing. You didn't try to hide it. You looked right at me. I didn't plan for you to be there. But you didn't run either. No, she said softly. Silence stretched between them like a wire. Julian stepped closer, voice measured. I don't need your justifications. I'm not judging you. I just want to know. His eyes locked on hers. Why? That single word held weight. She looked at him, calm, but unreadable.
But what happens when secrets can no longer be hidden? When the man who shouldn't want her refuses to look away? This is only part 1. Join us in part 2 as their worlds collide, and everything unravels. Leave your thoughts in the comment and subscribe now to Voice Threads so you don't miss what happens next.